The orders were clear, full compliance from every territory. 1 month into the new regime, and most of the world had learned the lesson. Loud resistance got you silence. Permanent, smoking silence. From Singapore to South Dakota, cities bowed. Heroes went ghost or turned red. No one dared step out of line. Except Lancaster County. Not openly. Not with arms or masks. On the surface, they complied like everyone else. The flags flew. The broadcasts played. The patrols were allowed. But something was off. The first team sent to install satellite surveillance came back shaken. Said the signal kept scrambling itself, like the equipment was pre-jammed. Said the land was hard to pin down. A week later, an armored convoy delivering ordnance disappeared between Marietta and Safe Harbor. No wreckage, no distress call, no tire tracks. Just 20 missing men and a rig full of sonic neutralizers that never showed on satellite again. They blamed it on a localized insurgent cell. Dispatched Task Force Echo with drones and tactical support. The drones failed mid-air over Conestoga River. Crashed like birds. The boots on the ground reported fog thick, choking, directionless fog, then silence. All 16 lost contact at 0230 hours. At first the regime thought it was sabotage. Human defiance. Maybe remnants of the old world clinging on. They brought in red tornado. Switched to atmospheric scanning. They rerouted electricity to thermal scans, infrared, seismic pressure detection. None of it worked. No matter what they tried, something in Lancaster broke the pattern. And every time the regime leaned harder, the break got worse. In Columbia, a high-ranking enforcer woke up screaming, unable to speak, his tongue shredded in his sleep. In Cryptids, 4 supply officers went blind during a briefing. No injury, no toxin, just darkness. In Ephrata, a patrol truck simply drove into a covered bridge and never came out the other side. When another crew checked the site, the bridge was empty. But all 4 soldiers were back at HQ, insisting they'd never left the barracks. But nothing stuck. Nothing could be proven. And no one wanted to admit they were afraid. The official logs just started calling it sector static. People in the cities didn't notice. Lancaster stayed quiet. The news kept running. The regime's grip held firm. But somewhere, under the soil, behind old brick, beneath iron bells and frozen ponds, the city itself watched. And when something didn't belong, it fixed the problem. They came at night. Not every night, just when the regime tried something bold. A deeper scan. A midnight arrest. An unauthorized interrogation. The kind of overreach that worked everywhere else. In Lancaster, it bought you a nightmare. No one saw them arrive. No alarms tripped. No resistance movement sent up a flare. 1 minute, a soldier was standing in a field outside Mountville. The next, he was gone. Left behind was his rifle, crushed like wet paper, and claw marks in the snow that led nowhere. Sometimes it was noise. Not screams, echoes. Echoes of iron hooves. Of rusted chains dragging across dry leaves. Of a woman's lullaby sung backwards in a dialect no one should know. In the city logs, these events became anomalous episodes. Ghost stories to the grunts. Bullshit to the brass. But the veterans knew. The ones who'd served in that county more than a week, they knew the rules. You didn't patrol alone. You didn't step off old stone paths. You didn't mention names like Mary Elgin or Jacko Lancaster or the tree-faced man unless you wanted to sleep light and pray hard. In the woods, something haunted. Not just one thing. Many. A Bigfoot was spotted behind a school fence in Quarryville, except this one had bone growing from its back like twisted antlers. 2 soldiers followed it. Neither came back. One of their helmets was later found with hair fused into the visor. Down by the river, kids spoke of the Susquehanna siren, a woman who walked across water and whispered truths that made men kill themselves. In the northern hills near Texter Mountain, they found a cave full of candles still burning in a place no one could reach. A goat-headed figure carved into the stone behind them, its smile crude and full of nails. And yet no one fought. No one needed to. Lancaster did not resist with arms. It didn't need revolution. It had memory. It had monsters. And every one of them had a score to settle with invaders. They thought they'd seen the worst the world could throw at them. They'd faced gods and aliens. Dimensional breaches, magical rebellions, ancient sorcery, time travelers, hellspawn. Superman had punched through all of it. The regime stood against chaos and made the world obey. But Lancaster County didn't behave like the rest of the world. There were no resistance cells. No meta-human activity. No broadcasts, no encrypted chatter. Just farmland, hills, and towns that hadn't changed in 100 years. On paper, it was perfect compliant. Quiet. But quiet wasn't peace. And what the regime found there wasn't war. It was something else. Not a hero's opposition. Not a villain's game. Lancaster did not respond like a world trying to be saved. It responded like a wound that remembered the knife. Red Tornado reported atmospheric distortions with no cause. The rays scans returned landscapes that didn't match satellite images. Swamp Thing refused to go near it, said the green was silent there. And when Wonder Woman tried to compel a township mayor with the lasso of truth, he laughed until his teeth fell out. Said something in Pennsylvania Dutch that made the translator glitch. Then dropped dead. No cause. No struggle. Just gone. This wasn't myth. This wasn't magic. This was a localized collapse in reality's boundaries, a place where belief had weight, where fear was currency, and where stories walked. The monsters didn't roar when they came. They didn't announce themselves. They arrived like gravity. Like punishment. A soldier stationed outside a barn in Elizabethtown swore he saw a horseman with no head, riding past his checkpoint every hour, on the hour. His hair turned white in 4 days. He wouldn't speak after that. Just carved the same 3 words into his bunk every night, * he sees you. *. Others heard singing from the cornfields. A girl's voice. Sweet. Familiar. Except there were no children in those zones. Some nights, the sky itself changed. Clouds hung wrong. The stars bent. Birds flew backwards. The regime, for all its power, for all its technology and fire, had no protocol for this. Because this wasn't rebellion. It was retribution. Not from a hero. Not from an army. But from a place. Lancaster County wasn't resisting. It was reminding. They came in force that night. Not scouts. Not survey teams. Names. Hawkman, for his centuries of occult knowledge. Martian Manhunter, for his mind and his reach. Dr. Fate, on temporary leash observe and report. Cyborg, for the data. And a Black Adam variant held in orbit, just in case scorched Earth became the only option. They dropped in over Mount Joy and fanned out in silence, confident, armored, briefed to hell and back. Superman didn't want questions. He wanted results. But they didn't speak of what they saw. Not when they returned. Not in front of anyone. Only in the debrief encrypted, closed door, 6 hours late, with their eyes shadowed and their voices low. What Cyborg said first was simple. Those monsters are real, all right. Then silence. A look passed between the others. Hawkman wouldn't sit. Jayon kept glancing at walls like he wasn't sure which plane of reality he was still in. Fate's helmet pulsed with an unreadable glow and wouldn't shut off. Cyborg continued. But they ain't right. He projected his readings. Static. Distortion. Spikes in radiation that didn't match any known class. Cold spots moving at angles that shouldn't exist. Audio fragments layered with whispers in languages lost before Babel. A heartbeat sound from the trees but not mammalian. Then came the kicker. Our scanners insist on temporal energy being in the area. That shut the room down. Not magical. Not meta-human. Temporal. Not time travelers. Time itself. Bent. Warped. Feeding back into itself like a dying loop. Those monsters, or rather Lancaster as a whole, Cyborg said, pausing like the words tasted wrong, they're linked to something outside our observable space. Dr. Fate finally spoke then. Just once. It is not a county. It is a convergence, a point of cross-flow. You destroy it, and you do not erase the threat you invited. The room fell into silence again. Red emergency protocols were discussed. Contingency warheads proposed. Then buried. Finally, someone asked what to tell Superman. Cyborg sighed. I know the boss wants to level the place, but we must advise him otherwise. And then, with no bravado left in him, if we try to topple this county, we might be inviting in something worse than cryptids. We might be inviting in the thing they're holding back. It started small. A few refugees. Then a few more. Disillusioned civilians. Discharged meta-humans. Farmers from Illinois. Tech workers from Mumbai. A priest from Italy who said he saw an angel die in Metropolis and couldn't stomach salvation under steel. They came because the news feed said nothing. They came because nothing ever happened on the ground. The world watched as Superman's squads moved through Lancaster like ghosts, armored, ever present and yet, never firing a shot. No civilians detained. No homes raided. No demonstrations of regime justice. To the world, it looked like the new order had met its match in silence. So people started to test it. A mother with 3 children crossed from Maryland in daylight. No gunfire. A van full of anti-regime pacifists arrived under drone surveillance. The drones blinked out. A known rebel cell leader from Detroit, face recognized by every global scanner, walked into Lancaster with nothing but a thermos and a duffel bag. No alarms. No blackout. No retaliation. Because Clark couldn't risk it? Not there. Not when every single time one of his men tried to escalate, something else escalated first. And worse than that, the people coming in never came out. Not because they were killed. Because they didn't want to leave. The cameras tried to catch footage, flickering shots of them days later, dressed differently, older, or somehow off. One woman was spotted in a roadside market laughing. She had been confirmed blind since birth. Now her eyes glowed faintly blue. Another, a soldier who defected to Lancaster undercover, was filmed in Colombia helping repair a church bell that had been listed as destroyed in 1911. And still, the flood grew. Whole buses started rerouting. Underground rail lines redirected. Word spread through whispers. They don't control it. They just stand there and hope it doesn't blink. The regime kept sending squads in. The squads kept vanishing. Or worse, coming back wrong. One squad was recovered at a checkpoint outside York. Their faces were perfect. Their voices, precise. But none of them cast shadows. Another squad was found 80 miles away, dehydrated and mute, fingers covered in ash. The only thing they would write was, "We weren't alone down there." Clark insisted it was coincidence. Lancaster isn't a sanctuary, he told the world. It's a staging ground for something worse. But the people didn't care. Because in a world ruled by terror, Lancaster didn't flinch. And if Superman wouldn't fire the first shot there, they figured maybe that's where the last shot would be fired. Superman stood on the digital map of North America, jaw-locked, teeth grinding as the red perimeter lit up around Lancaster County like a bleeding wound. He didn't speak for a long time. Just stared. Then, draw the line. A DMZ, unbreachable, armored, 360 degrees surveillance. No entry without biometric vetting. No migration without approval from the top. No more than 1,000 new citizens per year. That was the compromise. The illusion of mercy. But everyone knew what it really was. Containment. And still, they came. Families on foot. Trucks under hay. Subterranean routes built out of decommissioned rail lines. People walked through the winter to find the one place on Earth where the boots didn't stomp. Most got caught. Most were turned away. Quietly, non-lethally. Because the soldiers knew the rules. Do not cross the line. Do not touch the threshold. They had standing orders, no pursuit into the county. No weapon discharge within 2 miles of county soil. No intimidation. No blood. Because the last time a lieutenant took a shot that clipped the border, they never found his body. Only his uniform. Folded perfectly on the edge of the Pequea Creek. No blood. Just 24 handprints in the dirt, each one smaller than a child's hand, each one burned into the clay like glass. So now the regime stops them before the line. Rough if needed. Sometimes brutal. And as long as it happens on the right side of the county line, the monsters stay away. But if they slip, if one foot touches old road, if a hand presses against the glass of a Lancaster-bound bus, if a drone flies 1 inch over cornfields that don't grow on any satellite image, then it happens. The lights go out. The sounds start. And something comes forward. One night, a checkpoint soldier dragged a desperate woman back across the border by the wrist. They were 6 inches in. No one noticed. Until the fog rolled in. They found her curled at the edge of the road, shivering, mumbling prayers in tongues not spoken since before the flood myths. Her eyes had gone pale. Her skin was covered in frost. But she was alive. The soldier? His gear was found 3 miles up a tree. His radio whispered static in a child's voice for 3 days before it melted. After that, the troops started calling it the rule of the line. You don't cross it. You don't test it. You don't talk about what happens when someone else does. Even Superman obeyed it. He had to. Because even gods know when to leave something buried. That's what ate at him. Not the line. Not the monsters. not the cold silence from his own command when Lancaster came up in briefings. It was that he couldn't end it. He couldn't burn it. And Clark Kent Kall, ruler of Earth, didn't believe in things that couldn't be solved by will, by force, by heat vision and absolute certainty. But Lancaster wasn't loud. It wasn't armed. It wasn't anything he could point at and say, "This is the threat." So he waited. Every damn day. Watching that perimeter like a trigger he couldn't pull. Waiting for the excuse. One incident, that's all it would take. One attack outside the line. One monster that crossed over and gave him the out. One provable breach of containment. One sanctioned response. He wanted them to step outside. He needed them to. Because Clark Kent wasn't afraid of ghosts or cryptids or devils with hollow eyes. He was afraid of what they meant. A county that the regime couldn't tame. A people who didn't need heroes. A place where fear didn't rule, and worse, where it was respected. And that made it dangerous. So every time a smuggler got through, every time an old road collapsed under unexplained weathering, every time a soldier was found weeping on the edge of a covered bridge, mumbling about hooves and teeth and the songs under the earth, Superman gritted his teeth harder. Because he couldn't justify it yet. But the moment they slipped, the moment Lancaster bled even a drop outside its border, he was going to erase it from the map. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find out what bled back. And that was the moment he'd been waiting for. It started in Portland. Then Johannesburg. Then Caracas. Cities that had once cowered under regime banners began to twitch, to breathe again, to speak the unspeakable. If Lancaster can stand. One by one, they lit up. Not in rebellion, not yet, but in question. The regime had told them peace was absolute. That fear was the law of nature. That the gods now wore red. But if one corner of the earth was untouched, then the spell was broken. It wasn't coordinated. It didn't have to be. A teacher in Chicago refused to play the loyalty oath broadcast. A group of artists in Prague smuggled in a Statue of Liberty's broken hand. In Manila, a child painted a red X across Superman's logo and said it meant no monsters here. And in Lancaster, the winds shifted. Not violently. Not loudly. But deliberately. The church bells rang in every town at once. All of them. Even the ones that hadn't worked in years. Even the one submerged in the quarry outside Elizabethtown. No visible signal. No event inside the line. But Superman saw what it meant. The monsters weren't crossing. The county wasn't acting. But the world had heard the song. And finally one of them slipped. In Sao Paulo, a regime lieutenant issued a crackdown order on a protester rumored to have ties to a Lancaster smuggler network. She was dragged across a line. A border. Kicking. Screaming. She screamed one name before they crossed the threshold of a municipal building. "Tell them Mary Elgin watches." That was the line. Because they knew that name. The brass. The analysts. The ones who had read the files that didn't make it to public record. The files about the woman who had bled in 3 timelines at once. The woman who walked out of a grave during the Revolutionary War and disappeared into Pennsylvania fog, whispering through the ages. The protester vanished that night. The squad, too. Left behind was a smear of red not made from blood but rusted rose petals. That was the moment Clark turned toward the map again, fists clenched, breathing hard, not blinking. The world was catching on. The monsters weren't the threat. They were the excuse. And now he had it. His voice echoed through the war room, low and final. "I'm done waiting. Prepare the first strike." Lancaster burns. The first strike was surgical. No fireworks. No press. Superman sent his cutters operatives trained not just to fight, but to erase. No name badges, no insignias, just black armor and null gear calibrated to suppress meta-human bursts within 5 feet. Their targets were the hidden heroes. Not the gods. Not the icons. The ones who slipped the net in the early days. Who wandered into Lancaster seeking shelter and found something else. Some were retired. Some were broken. A few still wore their suits in private, their names long since forgotten by the world. But they stood their ground. When the regime struck, it was fast. Coordinated. They breached in 3 locations simultaneously beneath the quarry, through a fake farming co-op in Intercourse, and under the basement of a Mennonite church turned resistance haven. The old heroes fought. They died hard. And then, the monsters woke up. There was no alarm. No burst of magic. No nuclear flash. Just a pressure, like the earth itself inhaled. The regime strike teams started going dark one by one. The team in the quarry drowned in dry dust. The team in Intercourse reported movement behind them, then their cameras filled with hundreds of hands, too small to be adult, too long to be human. The church team sent back a single line of audio. "She's under the floor." Then silence. And then the sky changed. Not above the world, just over Lancaster. The clouds didn't move. They folded. Lightning sparked but never struck. It hovered. And the creatures came. Not cryptids, not quite. Reflections of every story ever whispered in Lancaster soil. The Susquehanna siren. The dogman of Drumore. The faceless preacher. The thing in the corn that smiled with too many teeth. A deer with no eyes and a crown of crows. Something that walked on 3 legs and whispered from all directions at once. And at the edge of it all, a boy in a blue coat, standing on the bell tower of a long-dead school, not moving. Watching. Hatchet at his side. musket on his back. The regime's remaining teams tried to pull out. They didn't make it. Not a scream. Not a trace. Just equipment found neatly placed on the county line the next morning, soaked in old well water and scattered with black feathers. And then, from the clouds, a red streak cut through the sky like judgment. He landed on the border road, fists already clenched, cape heavy with stormlight. His eyes burned. The earth cracked beneath his boots. Superman had arrived. And for the first time in months, the monsters stopped moving. He didn't hesitate. Not this time. Superman crossed the line with a sound like a thunderclap tearing the seams of silence. The air didn't scream, it went still, like the world itself held its breath. And then he unleashed. The first to fall was the tree-faced man, splintered against a silo with heat vision so hot it turned bark to ash and memory to steam. The siren tried to sing. He choked her mid-note and burned the riverbed where she lived. The water screamed like glass. The faceless preacher reached for his shoulder with hands made of old paper and sermons long banned. Clark tore him in half. He kept going. The legends came in waves. Stories born from centuries of whispered fear and sacrifice. The Black Bellboy. The Smoke-Eyed Pig. The Moth-Shade Widow. All of them fell. His fists didn't stop. The ground buckled. The wind screamed. Lancaster rippled. Not just with power but with memory. As the monsters died, so did their roots, and the stories beneath them cracked open like bones in a fist. Clark stepped through a street where once a blue flame rose in the time of redcoats, where a patriot who was never recorded had held a hill for 6 hours against men who didn't bleed right. The flame guttered out as he passed. He crossed fields where mutants once crawled from fallout, where cryptid wars raged under green-tinted skies, where lanterns whispered warnings in dead languages and children with silver eyes vanished under cover of storms. Gone. He crushed the grave of a thing that should never have had a name, buried in the 1760s and watched over by families who remembered what it cost to keep it still. The headstone turned to dust. He found the door beneath the barn in Wrightsville, the one with 7 locks and 13 seals, the one that had never opened in this timeline. He opened it, and he burned what lay inside. Everything was red for Clark Kent now. His world. His truth. His justice. There were no more stories. No more whispers. The monsters were gone. The soil quieted. And still, he kept walking. Because even if Lancaster stopped fighting, he couldn't. By nightfall, the trees stopped moving. By dawn, the fields were still. In less than 24 hours, every monster was gone. The shadows that once stalked between silos and cemeteries, dust. The watchers in the fog, the bone walkers under Pequia, the voice in the old covered bridge, all of it, silenced. No more claw marks on steel. No more hooves at midnight. No more eyes blinking from the well behind the church. The stories were severed, one by one, burned from memory like rot from a wound. Clark Kent Superman walked across every inch of Lancaster County, and nothing stood. He melted through burial stones carved in forgotten tongues. He shattered iron gates meant to never open. He flew through fog-thick skies and punched the night apart. The regime didn't hear from him. He gave no order. He wanted no help. This was personal. To him, they weren't monsters. They were defiance. They were the myth of a world that didn't need him. And he would not abide it. So he burned it. All of it. When he finished, he stood in the dead center of the county. A crossroads that hadn't existed on any map since the 1800s. Smoke rose behind him. The air was flat. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. It was over. The last phantom blinked from existence with a final shriek that no one heard except the soil. And Superman stood alone, red-lit, fists clenched, heartbeat thunderous in his ears. He had won. He had killed the impossible. And yet, the silence didn't feel like victory. It felt like something waiting. He stood over the ashes of the impossible, cape hanging like a blood-stained curtain behind him. The air around him buzzed, heat distortion warping the skyline, rippling over charred fields and collapsed chapels. No more screams. No more whispers. Just scorched earth and the raw hum of dominance. He raised his hand to the COMM. His voice was low. Measured. Cold. Now enslave this place. No hesitation. No ceremony. Just the order. Lancaster, the last place on earth that wouldn't kneel, was broken. The myths had been murdered. The silence had been shattered. And now it would serve. Regime troops moved in immediately. They paved over graveyards that had never been mapped. Built towers where barn ghosts once walked. Strung fiber lines through hills that used to hum with the old songs. They came with drills and databanks, with facial scanners and crowd herders. They came with the weight of every conquered city behind them. And this time, there were no monsters to stop them. No fog. No teeth. No legends. Only civilians, dazed and quiet, watching their world change brick by brick. But in some basements behind old coal doors and cellar walls where children still refused to look too long, the air was too cold. And the clocks ticked off rhythm. And beneath the skin of Lancaster, where stories were never truly written down, something ancient was not dead. Only waiting for the next chapter. It began with a single note. Low. Metallic. Thick with rot and memory. Gong. The sound rolled through the scorched valleys like thunder dragging chains. No one knew where the bell was. No one could trace it. All they knew was that it rang. Gong. Gong. It shouldn't have been possible. Every church in Lancaster had been cleared. Every steeple dismantled, every bell tower leveled or archived under regime lock. And yet there it was, ringing like it remembered something the world forgot. Gong. 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 The regime kept moving. They fanned out, relentless. Machines scanned basements. Drones mapped soul scars into blueprints. Soil was lifted in slabs to make room for towers that would scream in surveillance. They took heirlooms. Books no one remembered writing. Photographs that shifted when stared at too long. Lanterns that had never gone out until now. They took names from walls. They took land that refused to stay still on digital maps. And still the bell rang. Gong. Farmers were registered. Tradesmen tagged. All speech that deviated from approved dialects was flagged. Old songs were banned. Dust was sterilized. Lanterns smashed. Candles outlawed. But the bell didn't stop. It grew louder. Gong. The new regime headquarters was built atop the ruins of an old red barn outside Little's. One of the engineers there stopped speaking halfway through the install. Just froze, mouth open, head tilted, listening to something no one else could hear. He died an hour later. They found his earpiece melted into his skull. The logs on his daytop had read, "It knows we're taking. It hears everything we carry. The bell isn't ringing for warning. It's ringing to mark a tomb. Whose? Ours." Still, the regime took more. And the bell kept ringing. Deep. Unrelenting. Patient. Like something was counting the spoils. Like something was measuring the grave. The crackdown sharpened. No more subtlety. No more PR filters. The bell kept ringing, and Clark wanted it silenced. Now. So they turned the screws. Families were dragged from homes older than memory. Entire lineages erased from census logs overnight. Crying children forced to recite loyalty oaths beside the rubble of their grandparents' barns. Names were no longer spoken, they were catalogued, processed, assigned. Some begged. Some screamed. Most just stood in silence as the regime rolled over them like a black tide. Buildings came down, not just houses, but landmarks that had stood untouched for centuries. The White Chapel on Hare Street, where the walls bled candle wax every full moon. Gone. The stone schoolhouse that never cast a shadow. Leveled. They demolished the cemetery of 6, where no one buried bodies but fresh flowers appeared each morning. They paved over it. Nothing grew there again. Fields were torched. Wards painted over. Old family sigils scrubbed from barns with acid and fire. A woman who refused to unlock her storm cellar was buried with it. No trial. No notice. Just silence and smoke. And still the bell kept ringing. Gong. It didn't come from any tower. It didn't come from any machine. It came from below. And as the bell sang, the people began to vanish, not in bursts, not in panic, but in a slow, crawling hush. Families of 5 became 4, then 3, then none. No alarms. No struggle. Just absence. The regime logged it as desertion. They didn't see the footprints burned backwards into the frost. They didn't notice the walls of certain homes bowing outward, like something inside them had exhaled for the first time in centuries. And the bell grew louder. Not in volume. In presence. It didn't just ring through ears. It rang in blood. In bone. In memory. Something was waking. Something beneath the ashes. Something old enough to wear grief like a second skin. Something that knew what had been taken. And it was ringing the bell. For the end of the takers. The charges were set. An old loom mill abandoned by the world, but not by the land. A place where threads had once been woven so tight that even time had trouble unspooling them. The regime wanted it gone. Not just flattened, erased. The surrounding 3 miles too. Scorched earth. Purge it clean. 20 soldiers stood ready. Heavy armor. Perimeter drones. No civvies within 10 clicks. The perfect op. The soldier holding the detonator breathed in, thumb twitching above the switch. And then. Gong. 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 It hit the lungs before the ears. A sound like rusted iron weeping in rhythm. Everyone froze. Scanners glitched. Targeting systems blinked out, then came back with inverted terrain like the land refused to be mapped. The man with the detonator took 1 step back. And that's when he felt it. A hand. Cold. Steady. Unshakable. Wrapped around his wrist like a vice carved from bone and memory. In front of him, the air folded open, no flash, no storm, just a blink between moments and a man materialized. He wore an old trench coat, frayed at the cuffs, dusted in ash that hadn't fallen in decades. His hat was wide-brimmed, low. His stance was straight, calm. And his voice hit harder than any bullet the regime had ever fired. So you think you get to do whatever the hell you want? The soldiers raised weapons. Eyes wide. Mouths dry. Well, I got news for you. Lancaster County will never have a king. He stepped forward once. No fear. No hurry. Quite frankly, the concept is un-American. And that's when the eyes hit. They glowed not with heat, not with energy, but with clarity. Like they saw through illusion, propaganda, armor, lies. Like they saw night as day. As if truth itself had come to walk again. And at his side, low, holstered, was a .44 Magnum, old, oiled, resting easy, like it had killed tyrants before and didn't need permission to do it again. One soldier rookie, panicked, fired a single shot. Crack. It hit the man's forehead clean and bounced off like steel. No blood, no reaction, just the sound of metal ringing like a warning bell. The man looked at the soldier, not angry, just tired, like he'd seen this before, like he was tired of telling the same lesson to men who never listened. And without raising his voice, he spoke again. "Put the detonator down, or I swear to the old gods of this dirt, you won't be buried in anything history can find." The soldier drops the detonator like it burned him. It hits the dirt with a hollow clack, blinking red once before going dark. The squad doesn't wait. They run. Full sprint. No formation. No cover. Some trip. One screams. Most don't look back. And the man, dust on his coat, light in his eyes like memory forged into weapon, just watches them vanish into the tree line like children caught where they don't belong. He spits once. Amateurs. Then he turns slightly, face shadowed, eyes gleaming under the brim, and speaks to something no one else can see. A frequency older than signal. A voice carried across time, space, and blood. VCSN. What's going on in this timeline? There was no delay. The response came like memory waking up. VCSN online. Designation, LANC Azure 107B. Threat level, multiversal high. Anomaly type, injustice class divergence. Johnny, something's gone wrong here. The voice was familiar. Electric. Measured. More guardian than ghost. This timeline's bleeding. Heavy contamination reads like a mix between Hell Riders Prime and Fallout Boys Terminal. Wound origin, DC multivariant. Local designation, injustice. Confirmed KALL divergence. Cause, exposure to fear toxin kryptonite hybrid. Resulted in termination of Lois Lane and unborn child. Subject Clark Kent lost all equilibrium. Re-established planetary control via authoritarian regime. A beat. Data floods. Silence. Then. This is the first time Lancaster has ever formed in an injustice class timeline. It should not exist here. And then, the etch. That voice never flinched unless the stakes were cosmic. Johnny, this place might have been summoned. Your presence might not be coincidence. Then flat. Recommendation, kill the self-righteous crybaby. KALL's gone full Omega. The monsters weren't protecting the land from him, they were buying you time to get here. That bell? It's not summoning forces anymore. It's waiting on your answer. A pause. Your call, Mythkeeper. This isn't just Lancaster anymore. This is judgment ground. Now the wound is open. Now time bleeds. Now something older than legend stirs below the soil line of story. A force that does not serve myth. It creates it. And it's waking. And for God's sake, don't let him dig any deeper. VCSN ends transmission. Vanjik kneels beside the payload. Not cautious, deliberate. Fingers brush the dirt from the casing. Each charge humming faint with the cruel kind of confidence only men in power ever design. Sealed. Primed. Marked with regime insignia and hubris. He scoffs. So the man of steel's gone AWOL, huh? His voice is dry thunder beneath the looming ruins. Not rage. Not fear. Just that slow, unforgiving drawl of someone who's seen this game play out too many timelines, too many ways. He stands, dusts his coat, and looks toward the blackened loom mill, quiet now, but watching. Then down at the bombs. Well then, I say for one, I should return this lost property to him. He tilts his head, eyes narrowing like a gunslinger watching the edge of a duel he didn't start but sure as hell intends to finish. Then, low and cold, he utters his call sign. The air buckles. A sound like a heartbeat turned inside out. Like a name being remembered by the universe itself. Warp protocol engaged. The bombs vanish not in flame, not in light, but in narrative cut, sliced from one myth thread and stitched to another. Destination. Justice League headquarters. Modern day regime central. Vaulted ceilings. Crimson banners. Walls lined with relics stolen from every hero who dared to resist. In the dead center of the Hall of Judgment, just beneath the statue of Superman holding the earth in one fist, the bombs reappear. Stacked neatly. Armed, but calm. On top of them, folded like a gentleman's insult, a piece of parchment scorched at the edges. Written by hand in ink that smells like gunpowder and old sweat. From the Duke of Lancaster County. With love, of course. No signature. But he didn't need one. Because somewhere across space and smoke and bloodied myth, Superman would feel it. And he would know. The story isn't done. It's just about to start again. They detonate. No countdown. No warning. No intercepted signal or regime override. Just a breathless instant inside the Justice League's sanctum. That false temple built from the bones of peace. And then, boom. A rupture of myth and metal. Not just an explosion, a statement. Lancaster's reply to tyranny. The Hall of Judgment implodes, not outward, but inward, like the building itself realized it had sinned. Walls that once displayed victory reels of the regime's peacekeeping efforts shatter into fire. Steel banners bearing Superman's crest melt like wax in holy flame. The impact rolls through regime HQ like a funeral toll. The statue of Superman towering, triumphant, crowned in cold resolve cracks down the middle. His face splits first. Then the arm holding the earth shatters, globe tumbling to the floor, splitting open like an overripe fruit, data spilling out, files, secrets, footage long buried. The heart of the regime goes dark for 12 minutes and 16 seconds. Enough time for whispers to spread. Enough time for heroes hiding in shadows to see the footage. Enough time for civilians under boot to feel the shift. Because it wasn't just a bomb. It was a message written in fire. The Duke of Lancaster didn't just survive. He didn't just defy. He struck first. And the world had just been reminded. You can kill the monsters. But you better pray you don't piss off the man who buried them. The blast site was still glowing when he landed. Scorched marble. Bent steel. The walls of the Hall of Judgment peeled inward like a cathedral gutted by divine contempt. Fires hissed along the floor. A single regime banner fluttered down in tatters, landing at Clark's feet like a warning. He didn't speak. Just scanned. No origin point. No energy signature. No trace of teleportation tech. The war room was silent. Static on all feeds. Sensors malfunctioning. Then the footage looped. Again. And again. The bombs blinking into existence mid-air. The parchment landing atop them like a calling card written by time itself. Clark's fists clenched so tight the bones in his forearm cracked. What the hell did this? Then. The screams. From his earpiece. From the Lancaster border. His soldiers. One screaming his own name over and over before going silent. Another whispering through static, "He's back. He's real." He walked out of the fog with the bell behind him. Then, God help us, he smiled. Clark didn't wait. He tore from the sky like a warhead. The world blurred beneath him. Thunder split behind his flight path. Clouds burned. He raced toward Lancaster with fire in his eyes and ash in his wake. Because someone had struck his throne. Because someone had sent death into his house and carved a message into the ruins. Because someone had reminded the world what it meant to fight with belief instead of fear. And Clark Kent, Superman, High Commander of the regime, was about to make Lancaster County answer for it. Unless, of course, Lancaster had already prepared the next question. Clark heard it. Even above the wind howling past his ears, even over the wailing comms and panicked chatter of dying men, that voice cut through not just with volume, but with weight. It didn't beg. It didn't plead. It declared, oh God, he's real. Oh God, someone help me. The soldier's transmission cut hard, sliced mid-breath, mid-panic, as another voice, older, colder, unyielding, took its place. You're damn right, I'm real. Superman's eyes narrowed. His breath hitched in his chest. The air grew heavier. I step away for a few months and you bastards show up out nowhere in my home. Not on my watch. It wasn't just defiance. It wasn't rebellion. It was ownership. I don't have any love for the monsters and cryptids you killed, but they were protecting this place against the real monsters. I'll never consider them equals. But their slaughter at your hands is not justified. And then pure silence. Before the voice returned, like iron striking iron. I don't know who's in charge of this little powwow. But I think it's time you learned. A pause. Just long enough to feel like the earth itself braced. Not to mess with my home. Superman's flight wavered. For a millisecond, his trajectory faltered, not from impact, not from resistance, but from recognition. That voice didn't belong to a monster. Didn't belong to a god. It belonged to a man. A man who wasn't part of the old Justice League. Wasn't in any regime dossier. Wasn't supposed to exist in this continuity anymore. And yet, here he was. Back. Speaking. Claiming. Standing. Not in front of the world. Just where it mattered. In the dirt of Lancaster County. Where stories don't just survive, they answer back. Superman landed like a meteor. The crater he left cracked the pavement of Main Street in half. Dust shot skyward, choking the sunrise. Windows blew out for 3 blocks. Alarms tried to scream but fizzled, corrupted by whatever had already happened there. He rose from the crater slowly, cape dragging like a funeral flag behind him. Then he saw it. Miles of carnage. Regime patrols lay twisted across the street, some folded into their own armor like paper dolls. Drones split in half midair, still sparking. Troop transports flipped like toy trucks, crushed inward by something that moved with precise, human rage. But not a drop of firepower used. No plasma, no beams, no supernatural force signatures. Just brute motion. Gunmetal and fists. A .44 discharged only once 2 blocks away, point blank to disable an exo walker that had pinned a civilian. Clark scanned the scene. No civilians killed. Not one. His man? Shattered. Disabled. Some unconscious, others whimpering. One clawing his way under a wrecked APC, muttering, "He walked right through us, didn't blink, didn't even aim, just knew." Then Clark saw it. Boot prints in the asphalt. Heavy. Measured. No panic. The kind of stride that belonged to someone who wasn't improvising. Someone reclaiming ground. At the far end of the street, smoke coiling behind him, coat catching the wind like something alive, he stood. The same man from the comms. Hat still low. Magnum still holstered. Blood on his knuckles, none of it his. The Duke of Lancaster. Superman stepped forward, rage vibrating off his skin, voice like thunder trying to contain itself. "You don't know who you're standing against. But the man didn't flinch, didn't posture, didn't even bother to draw. He just looked at the destruction behind him, then back at the so-called man of steel, and said, without fear, "That's funny. Because it sure as hell looks like I do." Superman froze mid-step. KAL. The name hit him harder than a punch. Not just because it was personal, but because it wasn't public. Not here. Not now. Not in this continuity. Only a handful alive would dare speak it. Fewer still would survive doing so. His breath hitched. Not from fear. From calculation. How does he know that? The man didn't wait for him to process. He stepped forward, trench coat brushing the broken edge of the road, voice louder now, not with volume, but gravity. The words carried history. Not just his, but ours. The name is Johnny Vanjik. Clark's pupils contracted. A human. From planet Earth. Born from the streets we stand on now. He swept a hand behind him to Lancaster, to the soil, the cracked churches, the whispered legends that once held monsters at bay. This is my metropolis. My Gotham. And you just pissed off the one person in the multiverse who never loses. Superman's aura flared, instinctive. His heat vision ignited at the edges but didn't fire. Because something deeper was registering now. Something that didn't align with any tactical briefing, any timeline report. This wasn't just a man. This was a bloodline echo. A myth carrier. A node in the continuum Superman had never dared breach. A Vanjik. I will say I'm impressed, Johnny continued, voice now cutting through the very wind. You've conquered the foes me and the others fight off to keep our home safe. But you haven't seen the latter end of what we've faced. The imposter. The false storyteller. The unity. The foundling. Each name landed like thunder. And Clark had never heard them. We've killed gods before. And you are no god. Superman stepped forward. Johnny didn't budge. And then, his voice roared like a judgment laid down in stone. Tell me, nightmares. Are you afraid of the dark yet? And as the final word cracked like lightning. Gong. 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 The bell rang out again. Only now it wasn't just sound. It was invocation. And somewhere deep beneath the ruined fields of Lancaster County, the ground answered back. He moved like fury incarnate. No words. No theatrics. Just motion, a blur of red and rage streaking through the carnage. Superman launched forward, fist cocked, heat vision building behind his eyes, his mind screaming one command, end it. The air around him shattered from the velocity. Street signs twisted. Pavement peeled. The world blurred to a single target. Johnny Vanjik. But Johnny didn't run. Didn't flinch. He just shifted his weight 1 foot back, coat fluttering like something alive, and waited. And when Superman's fist came crashing down like a starfall, Johnny moved. Not fast. Not flashy. Just right. He slipped sideways, pivoted on heel, and brought his elbow up into the side of Cal's temple, not to injure, but to disrupt the myth of invincibility. It worked. Superman veered offline, stunned not by pain, but by the impossibility of being touched. He righted himself in midair, spun, and unleashed a wide blast of heat vision. But it bent. The beam arced mid-flight, pulled by something beneath the street, like the very land refused to let it strike true. Johnny was already moving again, boots cracking the asphalt as he surged forward, hand dropping to the .44 Magnum at his side. He didn't fire. Not yet. He spoke. Faster than a speeding bullet. Huh. The hammer clicked back. Let's test that. He fired once. The sound tore through the sky like a memory trying to escape. Superman caught the bullet mid-flight. Smirked. Until it detonated in his palm. Not shrapnel, not flame, but sound. Gong. One note. Pure. Perfect. It wasn't a weapon. It was a bell, a tone forged in the deep places of Lancaster, tuned to the rhythm of the land, the monsters, and the old stories Superman had tried to erase. And in that moment Clark flinched. Not from injury, but from the one thing he hadn't felt since he first declared himself ruler of Earth. Doubt. Johnny holstered the weapon and stood his ground. Eyes like fire. Voice steady. You're strong, Kal. Stronger than most. But you're playing checkers on a chessboard soaked in ghost blood. This isn't your story. It never was. Superman snapped. The bell tone still ringing faint behind his ears, mocking, unraveling, humbling, and that smirk, that quiet certainty in Johnny's voice, that was the match in the powder. His pupils vanished in a flash of molten red. Enough. He launched forward, not like a hero, but like a force of nature detonating in a straight line. The punch landed center mass. Direct hit. Johnny's body snapped back like a meteor, tore through the street, shattered the front of a hardware store, blew clean through two support pillars of the old printing mill, and kept going, walls crumbling, rebar curling like thorns around him, until finally, boom. A cloud of dust, stone, and story rose as the building collapsed in a symphony of groaning steel and broken memory. For a beat, just a beat, Clark hovered, breathing hard, scanning for movement. Smoke curled around his fists. Then, a cough. A shuffle of rubble. Then a voice, ragged but dry, from somewhere inside the broken bones of the street. Okay. A slab of wall shifted. A hand emerged. Dust and blood mixed across a torn coat, one sleeve gone, hat missing. Then Johnny Vanjik stood, back cracked straight, bleeding from the mouth, a slow grin forming even as one eye swelled shut. I'll admit. He spit dust, wiped blood from his chin. I felt that one. He didn't flinch, didn't groan, didn't ask for help. He just rolled his shoulder, adjusted the holster, and looked up at the most powerful being on earth. Like he was staring at a man, not a god. Now we're talking, KAL. Let's see if you can hit harder than history. Behind him, the rubble twitched. Not from aftershock, but from something beneath it. Because while Superman had buried Johnny in bricks and steel, he'd also just woken up the ground. The moment Johnny's boots locked back to the broken street, his eyes ignited not just with defiance, but with that unmistakable, unshakable Lancaster light. It wasn't fire. It wasn't meta-human. It was something older, the glow of a man carrying stories that never died. Because I have seen history. Dust swirled around him like memory pulling in breath. In every timeline. His grip tightened on the .44. That old gun didn't just hold bullets. It held answers. And I have beat it all. He moved. Fast. Precise. Not like a meta-human but like a man who had practiced how to kill gods. Boom. 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 The first volley of shots tore through the smoke. Superman jerked back, hit clean in the shoulder, then the thigh. Sparks flew as the slugs impacted his suit, bruising the air, ringing with that Lancaster gong every time they hit. The last round caught his side, bending him in flight. But he recovered fast. Too fast. Clark's cape snapped like a whip as he spun out of the final bullet's path, eyes narrowed, and then exhaled. The breath came white and brutal. A cyclone of unnatural cold slammed into the ruins around Johnny, catching the edges of the demolished mill, weaponizing the collapse. Concrete cracked. Rebar groaned. Beams overhead twisted into knives of steel rain. A full wall buckled and caved toward Johnny, snow and ash mixing mid-fall like the sky itself was trying to erase him. But Johnny didn't run. He spun mid-step, used the butt of his gun to hook a fallen support beam, and vaulted sideways just as the wreckage collapsed where he'd stood. He hit the ground rolling, came up in a kneel, one arm shielding his face from the debris storm. Then raised his head. Bleeding. Grit in his teeth. That damn Lancaster gleam still burning in his gaze. You're fast, KAL. Strong. He stood again. But I told you. The .44 clicked back, loaded. I beat history. Then, softly. You really think I didn't come here with a plan? And beneath the rubble now cooling around him, something hummed. A low tone, deep in the bones of the street. A resonance. Like a key had been turned. Like the soil had just been given permission. The street trembled beneath their boots. Dust still curled from the collapse, Ash mingled with the snow of Superman's breath, but neither man yielded. Johnny moved first. He surged through the rubble like a hammer thrown by fate. No cape, no theatrics, just raw resolve wrapped in blood and grit. His boots pounded the ground with rhythm, like he knew the song the land was humming beneath him. Superman met him mid-charge, teeth bared, eyes red hot. They collided. Fist to fist. Steel to legend. A shock wave cracked the air, windows exploded for 5 blocks. Johnny slid back, boots digging grooves into the blacktop, but never fell. Superman blinked sideways at supersonic speed, aiming a blow to the ribs. Johnny pivoted, took the hit on the turn, used the momentum to land a shoulder strike straight into Cal's gut. Superman flew back 20 feet. Cratered a regime transport. He laughed. "You're human. You shouldn't be standing." Johnny cracked his neck. The right side of his jaw had started to bruise. You ever try telling Lancaster soil what it should or shouldn't do? He fired again, 2 slugs. Superman dodged this time, faster than sight, darting above Johnny and slamming down with both fists. Johnny Dove rolled, drew his second weapon from a hidden hip holster, a Lancaster forged iron dagger, carved from the bell that rang the night his bloodline first stood against darkness. He threw it. Superman caught it midair and winced. It burned. Real iron. Real story. Real consequence. Even God's got roots, Kal, Johnny said. You forgot yours. Superman snarled and let the blade drop, barreling back in. They clashed again, punch for punch, no longer a hero and a legend, just 2 men who refused to fall first. Johnny parried a blow, gut-punched Clark so hard the air warped. Clark kneed Johnny in the ribs crack, but Johnny caught the leg, flipped him onto his back, and dove only for Superman to blast upward, dragging Johnny with him mid-air. They slammed through a silo, through a barn, through a church steeple long since abandoned. And when they landed, both were bleeding, both breathing hard, both smiling now like this was the only thing in the multiverse that still made sense. Superman hovered just above the ground, muscles coiled like a viper. Johnny stood in the dirt, a cracked lens over his left eye, pistol low, shoulders square. The fight wasn't over. It was just warming up. Johnny didn't wait. The moment they squared again, dirt and blood mixing beneath their boots, steam rising off their backs like war breath, he opened fire. Boom. 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 Each shot timed, not wild, not desperate. He wasn't aiming to kill. He was aiming to guide. Superman blurred upward to evade. Johnny kept firing. Clark dodged left. Johnny stepped right. The slugs didn't miss, they hurted. Each bullet cracked with the tone of the Lancaster bell, vibrational tracking, laced with story-rooted kinetic current. Superman thought he was escaping. He was being played. Where you run into, boy? Johnny growled through gritted teeth, reloading without breaking stride. You ain't running from me, you're running where I want you. Superman shot upward again to break free. That was the cue. Johnny knelt, slammed a fist to the ground, and spoke a word in a language only old Lancaster ghosts still remembered. The air around Superman shifted, bent. The heat of the atmosphere twisted into a cone, a spiral of kinetic resistance and directional force. Every bullet Johnny had fired was humming in perfect geometric alignment, shaping the pressure above Superman into a single, tightening tunnel. A cone of ascent. It didn't pull Superman. It pushed him. And for the first time in years, he wasn't flying under his own power. He was being launched. You wanted to rise above us, Johnny barked, standing now, watching him vanish into the heavens like a bad omen shot into the stars. Then keep going. And don't come down till you remember what the hell ground feels like. Superman screamed in defiance, tried to halt himself mid-air, but the cone fought back, woven from ballistic memory and story-bound resistance, crafted not to kill, but to remind. To remind him that even gods need to land eventually. He broke atmosphere. The air burned off his skin. Stars replaced clouds. Silence. Cold. Weightlessness. Alone. And far below, on the ruined fields of Lancaster County, Johnny holstered the .44, his voice carried upward by the last trailing hum of the bell. This story ain't over, KAL. But now it's my chapter. Above the world now. No air. No noise. Just the black sea of space. And the sun, burning before him like a crown of rage and rebirth. Superman floats, blood still drying on his face, dust from Lancaster County clinging to his suit like the fingerprints of a land that refused to kneel. His chest rises once. Twice. And then he turns his eyes to the star that birthed his power. He remembers. He's not just a conqueror. He's not just KALL. He is a solar engine. The embodiment of impossible strength. He is Superman. And he has an ace. You want to throw me off my throne, Vanjik? Then you better hope the sun burns out before I'm done with you. He hurls himself into the heart of the star. And the sun answers. Solar flares twist around his body like golden serpents, his skin drinking deep of every forgotten photon. His cells erupt, cracking open the restraints of flesh and restraint. His suit begins to shred, peeling back to reveal the core beneath, not cloth, not armor but light. Muscles swell with century-old solar reserves, drawn not just from this sun, but from every yellow star his kind was ever touched by. His voice, silent in the void, speaks into himself. No more holding back. His eyes ignite not red, but gold, burning with the wisdom of ages and the heat of 10,000 dawns. His cape disintegrates. His skin glows with radiant silver and gold threads coiling beneath translucent flesh. Not a man. Not even a god. A solar myth made manifest. Superman Prime. The form he swore he'd never use again. The version of himself meant for the end of time. But Johnny Vanjik had dragged it out of him. With grit. With blood. With defiance. So now, Superman Prime turned his gaze back to Earth. He saw the blue marble turning, shrinking beneath him. He saw Lancaster small, but not silent. Not afraid. And he felt it again. That rage. That sting. That doubt. But now, it was drowned in sunlight. He clenched his fists. And the stars bent away from him. Let's finish this. And with a soundless roar, Superman Prime descended a comet of pure solar vengeance. Back toward the one man who had dared to punch history in the teeth. Back to Lancaster. Back to Johnny Vanjik. He descended like judgment. Not a blur. Not a streak. A spear of golden ruin, plunging from the heavens like the wrath of a forgotten sun god set loose. The sky didn't rumble. It wept. As Superman Prime tore back through the atmosphere, oxygen ignited in his wake, painting the clouds in fire halos. Satellites blinked out. Radios screamed static. Birds fell from the air. And in the heart of Lancaster, where the soil still trembled with the old blood of legends, Johnny Vanjik looked up. Well. He rolled his neck. Looks like he found the sunlight. Then impact. Boom. Everything broke. Johnny didn't get to move. The second Superman Prime touched ground, the county cracked open. A crater exploded outward, swallowing 3 city blocks. Pavement unspooled like film burning in reverse. Trees commoosed from the pressure of his arrival alone. Regime wreckage disintegrated, metal turned to mist. Johnny was launched not backward. Upward. The force of the shock wave sent him through a water tower, then into a grain silo, then through the roof of the old county courthouse, then down again, body skipping across a cornfield like a stone across a war-scarred lake. He didn't get up. Not right away. Superman Prime hovered over the ruin, eyes gold, cape a tail of sunlight, skin still flickering with microflares. He didn't smirk. He didn't speak. He just hovered, glowing, the world shrinking beneath his brilliance. A titan. A demigod. A nuclear truth. This was no longer about law, or peace, or fear. This was about finality. Johnny stirred beneath a broken silo blade. Blood caked his teeth. One leg refused to move. His trench coat charred, half-torn, fluttered in the scorched breeze. He coughed. And laughed. Low. Cracked. Okay. That one I definitely felt. He planted his hands into the dirt, Lancaster dirt, grit and soil that still remembered the names of its dead. and as he pushed himself upright, bones howling, lungs on fire, the bell rang again. Gong. One note. Just one. But Superman Prime paused. His golden eyes narrowed. Because somehow, even after that, Johnny Vanjik was still getting up. Superman Prime didn't wait. He descended like wrath without pause, fists clenched, golden energy bleeding from every pore. Whatever restraint once defined him gone. Whatever moral compass remained burned out under the weight of power and pride. He slammed into Johnny before the man could stand fully upright. Crack. Johnny's ribs gave way beneath the first blow. The second drove him through a hay silo, flattening it into splinters. The third came mid-air, Superman grabbing Johnny by the throat and hurling him skyward, then appearing above him before gravity could take hold, and slamming him back into the earth. The crater deepened. Johnny gasped. Blood leaked from his nose, mouth, ears. Superman Prime hovered above him now, hands glowing, breathing hard but calm in that dangerous way only beings who have convinced themselves they are always right can be. You wanted a fight, he said, voice deep, layered with solar resonance. You wanted to remind me what it felt like to bleed. He raised a fist. Now I'll remind you what it feels like to lose. Boom. Fist to chest. Boom. Knee to jaw. Boom. Backhand that sends Johnny skipping across a dirt field like a corpse being denied burial. Superman lands beside him, grabs him by the front of the coat, lifts him like a rag doll. You call yourself Duke. You think this dirt makes you strong. He lifts Johnny high overhead, light swirling around them both. This land dies with you. Then he brings Johnny down across his knee spine first. The sound isn't just physical. It's mythic. A crack not of bone, but of narrative. As if the story itself winces. Johnny hits the ground hard. Blood pools. One eye shut completely. Breathing shallow. That Lancaster light in his gaze flickering like the end of a candle. Superman Prime stands over him. Tall. Unshaken. Solar God incarnate. You're done. Silence. The wind howls through the trees. Even the bell is quiet now. Johnny doesn't move. For the first time, it looks like the Duke has truly fallen. But then, the dirt shifts beneath his fingers. And faint, almost imperceptible, the hum begins again. Not the bell this time. Something older. Something beneath. And Superman Prime, just for a second, furrows his brow. Because this story, it still isn't over. Johnny moved. Barely. One arm dragged through gravel. Fingers clutching at the bleeding earth like it owed him one last breath. His spine was shattered. His ribs crunched with every gasp. Blood filled his mouth faster than he could spit it. His trench coat was tatters, his legend unraveling. but he still moved. That refusal, that Lancaster defiance, was like a splinter under Superman Prime's golden skin. So Clark responded the only way a god without patience does. He kicked him. Thud. Johnny flew back 30 yards, skidding through broken fencing. Thud. Another kick, this time catching him mid-roll, sending him cartwheeling through an abandoned barn, crashing out the other side in a storm of wood and dust. Thud. He tumbled over an embankment, bounced off the hood of a ruined regime tank, then tumbled again. Over and over. Dirt and blood trailing behind him like the end of a bad prophecy. The final kick came at full force. A solar-charged boot slammed into Johnny's side, and the man, barely conscious, barely breathing, launched across the countryside, a human meteor tumbling toward the horizon. He didn't stop rolling for almost 2 miles. Until he hit the banks of the Susquehanna River, in the battered remains of Columbia, a ghost town soaked in myth, fog curling like whispers along its shoreline. Johnny landed hard, skidding through gravel and water and forgotten brick. He didn't get up. His body twitched once, maybe reflex. His hand clenched, not around a weapon, just the mud. The soil. Even now. Even like this. Superman Prime landed nearby, silent as judgment, cape scorched at the edges, golden aura flickering like wildfire, ready to consume whatever dared move. He stood at the water's edge, staring at Johnny's crumpled body with a cold, final calm. "Stay down." His voice wasn't a threat. It was a sentence. "The next hit won't be with my hands. It'll be with history. I'll erase your legacy. Burn the name Vanjik out of every timeline. Make sure no one remembers your rebellion. Not even your ghosts." Johnny didn't speak. Didn't flinch. Didn't rise. But deep in the black water of the Susquehanna, something stirred. Because Columbia remembers. Columbia never forgets. And Johnny, he was still alive. The river shivered. Not with current, but with memory. Superman Prime stood unmoved at the edge, gold-lit and righteous, towering above the mangled figure at his feet. But Columbia was watching. And Columbia doesn't forget. The air shifted. Summer wilted. And from the cracks in reality, winter bled through. Frost kissed the gravel beside Johnny's blood. A wind rolled in, not warm, not of this time, and with it came the sound of boots in snow, the clang of steel on steel, the echo of gunpowder igniting in fog. Johnny's eyes blinked open. Vision blurred. And then he saw him. A figure standing at the river's edge, not Clark, not a soldier, but a ghost wrapped in legacy. Blue coat, red rose on the back, hatchet in one hand, musket slung across the chest like a vow carved in walnut and gunmetal. The man turned. His face was shadowed under a tricorn hat, but his eyes glowed silver. The same silver Johnny had seen in the mirror, Raven. Eshelman, Johnny whispered, the name like a lock clicking open in his blood. And in that moment, just a moment, he saw it all. British redcoats falling, muskets misfiring, men screaming in woods that didn't echo. A blur in the trees. A ghost. The first Lancaster nightmare. The first Vanjik. The Blue Raven. His ancestor. His legend. His warning. Raven stepped forward. Not fully real. Not illusion. A story remembered aloud by the river. He extended his hand, palm open. Johnny took it, and the cold surged through his arm like lightning wearing history's bones. Johnny rose. Not staggered. Not crawling. He stood upright. Tall. Whole. Wounds closing in real time. Ribs knitting. Skin sealing. Blood drying into memory. His breath came slow and deep, mist steaming from his mouth though the day was hot. Then, flash. His eyes flared silver blue, brighter than any sun could hope to burn. A hatchet formed in his left hand, wrought iron, carved from Raven's own legend, runes etched down its shaft. Light pulsed at the blade's edge like it hungered. In his right, the .44 Magnum, reforged, glowing faint, brighter now than ever. Superman Prime took one step back. Just one. Because for the first time, he felt the weight of story. Not just myth. Inheritance. Johnny looked up, coat fluttering from the resurrection wind. The silver in his gaze no longer flickered. It commanded. You made one mistake, Kal. You brought me here. He stepped forward, weapons drawn, voice calm as steel wrapped in fire. This river remembers me. Now it's time the world does too. Johnny stepped forward. The river behind him whispered like scripture. Frost laced the stones. The wind didn't blow, it bowed. His coat, still torn, clung to his shoulders like a second flag, and as his boots pressed into the soil by the Susquehanna, he looked Superman Prime dead in the eye. The hatchet in his left hand pulsed with silver blue light, an heirloom of pain. The .44 Magnum in his right, quiet but hungry. His voice didn't yell. It didn't need to. It carried. This is where my ancestors saved my city. Right here on this soil, by this water, in this moment. The mist began to rise, not just fog now, but memory made flesh, coiling like ghosts too proud to die. This is where the possibility for the Vanjikis to exist was born. He took another step. The river rippled. This is where the Blue Raven stood alone against an army. Images flickered through the mist. Raven Eshelman, hatchet in hand, blood on his coat, redcoats screaming as the trees closed in. Thousands of British soldiers turned away from the city. One man with a musket and a cause. He nearly died here, killing their general. Johnny's voice cracked, not from pain, but from weight. from truth. He had no powers, no multiverse, no backup. He had Lancaster grit. Superman Prime stood silent, not afraid. But something in his face changed. A twitch. A flicker. Because this wasn't rebellion anymore. It was remembrance. Johnny raised the hatchet. His hand trembled not from weakness, but because he was holding every life that ever died to keep this place breathing. My people died for this land more times over than any man could count. He leveled the gun. The silver glow in his eyes intensified. Snow began to fall. Summer forgotten. And I won't let you erase their story. The bell didn't need to ring. The land was ringing now. Johnny's words came low. Measured. Not spat in anger, delivered like a final verdict. If this is how your people behave, KAL. The mist coiled tighter. The wind cut sharper. The river hissed, like it was boiling in grief. Then I'm glad the Kryptonians are nothing more than animals on some ship out in space. Silence. Superman Prime's golden glow faltered just slightly. Not in strength. In certainty. Because he'd been called tyrant. Dictator. False god. But this was different. This was someone looking him in the eye, not in fear, but in disgust, and saying, "Your legacy isn't power. It's shame." Johnny stepped forward again, closer now. Hatchet still burning with ancestral light. Gun unwavering. You think power makes a people noble? You think floating above history lets you rewrite it? He shook his head. Slow. Sad. Firm. You don't get it? Krypton didn't fall because of a cataclysm. It fell because it forgot how to be human. Then, softly. And now so have you. A breeze passed between them. Cold. Final. Somewhere, deep beneath the riverbed, the old bell began to tremble again. And Clark Kent Superman Prime stood in silence. With nothing left to say. There wasn't silence because Superman was reflecting. There was silence because rage had swallowed language whole. His eyes twitched once. Then burned gold hotter than a star's scream. His fists clenched so tight the sound of bone grinding against solar-forged flesh echoed down the river. No reply. No philosophy. No speech. Just pure, blinding fury that someone dared say what he knew deep down might be true. You think you're better than us. You think some hick with a gun and a ghost for a name can outlast a god. His voice was no longer his. It was fire laced with vengeance, the sound of a tyrant too proud to grieve. And then he moved. Fast. Too fast. He lunged forward with a speed that tore the air in two, both fists pulled back, aiming to obliterate Johnny Vanjik, not defeat, not subdue, erase. But Johnny was already moving too. Because the land had warned him. Because the stories were moving through him now. the bell tolling beneath the ground, the winter wind sharpening the world, the spirit of the raven rising through his blood. Superman Prime crashed toward him like a collapsing sun. Johnny screamed back. Lancaster stands. Hatchet met fist. Gun met ribs. And the river exploded. Not water memory. Not mist reverence. And in the center of it, fire met frost, as Superman Prime's fists crashed into the space Johnny Vanjik had just vacated, the ground giving way beneath them both, churning into raw trench and shattered stone. But Johnny was already turning mid-air, hatchet flashing like a war sigil, carving a line across Superman's chest. Not deep, but deep enough. Enough to draw golden blood. Clark growled, spun with feral precision, and grabbed Johnny mid-strike, slamming him into the riverbed. Boom. The water shot upward in a spiral. Trees snapped along the banks. A tugboat anchored 2 miles downriver capsized from the shock wave. Superman didn't wait, he drove Johnny through the mud, dragging him like a meteor across time-worn stone. But Johnny, barely conscious, ribs screaming, vision fractured, grinned, and pulled the trigger. BLAM. Point blank, .44 Magnum to Clark's side. A bullet forged from the shattered bell of St. Michael's, etched in glyphs passed down from the Raven's own war journal. It pierced skin. Not all the way through, but deep enough to make a god blink. Superman roared, staggering, heat vision crackling wide but not yet aimed. Johnny used the moment. Rolled, planted the hatchet, levered himself up with one arm, and tackled KAL into the side of the Bridge Street overpass, where concrete cracked like brittle eggshell under their weight. They broke through the first pillar. Then the second. Superman came back hard, eyes blazing, and drove a punch into Johnny's stomach that lifted him off the ground, sent him spiraling end over end through an abandoned rail yard. Johnny rolled twice, slammed into a rusted locomotive, and again stood, breathing fire, hatchet limp at his side, Magnum smoking, eyes still silver blue. You're not a god, KAL. You're just a man who forgot what it means to fall. Superman gritted his teeth, chest heaving, hair wild. Then let me teach you, Vanjik. He flew again. Johnny met him, screaming through blood. Try me. They collided midair, and the sky cracked open. The sky split. Not like thunder. Like prophecy. As Johnny and Superman Prime collided midair, the heavens rippled outward like they'd been waiting for this fight since time began. Clouds shattered. Birds vanished. Lightning screamed and had no place to land. They tumbled upward, fists flying in brutal rhythm, one powered by solar fury, the other by a legacy older than any flag, any cape. Johnny landed a backhand across Clark's jaw, spinning him midair, followed it with the blunt edge of his hatchet to the spine. Superman grunted, twisted, and drove his elbow into Johnny's collarbone, fracturing it, but Johnny kept punching, kept bleeding, kept fighting. Because Lancaster doesn't stop. Superman snapped. He blasted Johnny with heat vision at point blank, full power, no restraint. The beam consumed everything in front of him, cutting a path across the river, carving glass into the earth. Johnny's silhouette was lost in light until he came hurling through it, on fire, screaming with a roar that shook the treetops, and drove his hatchet into Cal's shoulder. Metal met myth. Superman screamed, not in pain, in defiance, and slammed Johnny down, into the rail yard again. Trains toppled. Steel warped. Embers rose from the tracks like ghosts returning to cheer. Johnny hit the ground and skidded half a block, carving a trench with his body. Clark landed on him instantly, fists like hammers. Wham! 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 Blood sprayed. Pavement shattered. But when he paused, Johnny's hand came up. Hatchet still in grip. And he jammed it into the ground. Gong. A quake. Not seismic narrative. A pulse of ancestral energy ripped outward, flinging Superman back like a ragdoll caught in a story older than him. He crashed into the side of a grain elevator. Johnny rose again. Barely able to walk now, skin shredded, coat nearly gone but still upright. Still glowing. Still his. His voice was ragged now, full of gravel and blood. You can't kill a Vanjik. Not here. Not while Lancaster remembers. Superman growled, pulling himself from the wreckage, golden blood streaking across his jaw. Then I'll make it forget. And again they charged. No more chess moves. No more speeches. Just fists. Hatchet. Fury. Legacy. A god and a man locked in a war neither of them could afford to lose. And above them, the sky kept watching. The tide began to shift. Not with thunder. Not with spectacle. But with wear. Toll. The kind of slow break only a human could survive. Superman Prime crashed into Johnny again, fists blazing with light, but this time, Johnny rolled with the blow, absorbing the momentum, coming up behind him with a slam of the hatchet to the back of Clark's knee. Crack. Not bone tech. One of the reinforced braces laced through Superman's suit, a stabilizer fractured. Clark stumbled. Just for half a second. But in that second, Johnny fired. Boom. .44 Magnum to the side of the head. The sound cracked windows across 3 blocks. Superman twisted, dazed, flying sideways into a grain silo again, knocking it down on himself. Johnny limped forward. Still bleeding. Still burning. But now, focused. This wasn't a brawl anymore. This was a hunt. Superman burst out of the wreckage with a scream, blazing hot and furious. He charged again, but his speed was off. His angles, sloppy. Johnny knew that look. He's burning too hot. Burning too fast. The solar cells were overloaded. His body pulling too much at once. This form wasn't meant for prolonged war, it was meant to end wars in seconds. But this wasn't over in seconds. This was Lancaster. This was attrition. Johnny ducked a heat vision swipe, rolled under it, closed distance and struck. Hatchet to the ribs. Pistol whip to the jaw. Another shot to the thigh. Boom. Superman fell to one knee. Not because he couldn't rise, but because he was slowing. Johnny stood above him, chest heaving, blood pouring from a gash across his cheek. That's the problem with gods, Kal. You rise too high. He grabbed Clark by the collar, and slammed a knee into his face. You forget how to fight on your knees. Superman roared and tried to swing. Johnny caught it with both hands. Held it. Held the punch. Superman's eyes went wide. Because he could feel it now. The fatigue. The cracks forming in the solar armor. The burn across his core. The weight of the fight. And Johnny, still standing, still staring, still Lancaster. Come on then, Johnny whispered, silver blue eyes burning like winter fire. Let's see what happens when a god runs out of gas. The pendulum swung. Clark faltered, but so did Johnny. Every move now was pain. Not sharp and shocking, deep, grinding, like old bones begging for rest. His coat hung in ribbons. His arms trembled. His hatchet shook in his grip, not from fear, but from exhaustion seeping into legacy. Even Lancaster blood has limits. Superman Prime rose slow, but still rising. The gleam of invincibility was dulled, sure. But he was not broken. Just wounded. And Johnny, wearing thin. He could feel it. The toll of being human in a war meant for titans. His vision blurred. One eye swollen shut. Breaths shallow, wheezing through cracked ribs. Blood filled one lung. His fingers numb. He tightened his grip on the hatchet anyway. He holstered the magnum with hands that shook. And still he stood. Superman spat golden blood onto the concrete, face wild with rage and disbelief. You're tired, Vanjik. You're mortal. That's the problem. You break. Johnny coughed wet, thick, then smiled. Yeah. But I get up anyway. Clark lunged. Johnny blocked, but it hurt. His forearm took the blow, something cracked. He twisted, swung the hatchet. Clark dodged, caught his arm, and threw him. Johnny hit a wall hard. Didn't bounce. Just slid down it, coughing up more blood than breath. He tried to rise. Arm gave out. Tried again. Knees trembled. Finally he stood. But slow. Staggered. His stance off. His weight shifted to one side to avoid putting pressure on a likely broken hip. And Superman Prime. He circled now. No longer rushing. No longer furious. Predatory. The golden glow dimmed just slightly, but his fury focused. Because now he saw it. Johnny was real. Human. Wounded. Clark wanted to savor it. I could end you with a breath. Johnny laughed through broken teeth. Then why haven't you? Clark scowled because he didn't have an answer. But Johnny. He was hurting. Badly. Each second stole a little more resolve. Even the river had gone still. The wind held its breath. And the fight wasn't over. But both warriors knew. They were running out of chapters. Johnny staggered. The world was tilting. His breath shallow, pulled through grit teeth and bruised ribs. Muscles twitching. The silver blue glow in his eyes, once a beacon, now a flicker. Superman Prime loomed, chest heaving, cracked but shining, his fury held in check only by exhaustion. Johnny knew one more clean hit, and it was over. So he reached deeper. Past muscle. Past fear. Into the storyline beneath his skin. He whispered the phrase, his call sign words, not born from Earth, not from Krypton, but from the in-between. From Lancaster logic and multiversal memory. And space around his hand folded inward, the air humming with crinal strain. From that rift, like a hand reaching across eras, Johnny pulled a shard of gold kryptonite, untouched by time, preserved in a story where Clark Kent never rose. It glowed like the death of a sun. His voice was weak, but steady. This ain't a weapon, Kal. It's a reset. Superman Prime's eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. And for the first time, he looked vulnerable. Johnny lunged, pain forgotten, driven by that final spark of purpose. Hatchet dropped. Just the shard now. He roared and drove his fist, gold K shard crackling straight into Superman's chest. Boom. The impact didn't sound like power. It sounded like a chord breaking. Superman shuddered. Light dimmed. His muscles rippled with instability, solar fibers unwinding. The gold energy pierced his field, touched his cells. And for a second, Kal wavered. Fell to one knee. The golden glow around his body began to flicker like a dying torch. His head dropped. Breath ragged. But then, one last surge. From deep in the core of his being. Reflex. Rage. Kryptonian will. With a blast of air and fire, Superman's heat vision flared wide, not at Johnny, but at the shard in his hand. The gold kryptonite disintegrated in a flash of molten light, scattering to wind and water. Johnny stumbled back, palm smoking, weaponless again. Superman Prime rose, still glowing, but now barely. His aura flickered like a candle fighting midnight. His voice was hoarse. Not godly. You almost did it? He staggered forward. You almost took it from me. Johnny didn't speak. He couldn't. But he didn't fall either. Two men now. One drained god. One dying legend. Both standing. And the fight? Still breathing. And then it happened. A change in the air. The kind of shift not measured in temperature but in truth. Like the world inhaled, and forgot how to breathe back out. Johnny blinked through the haze, unarmed, broken but still standing. Superman Prime, dim but not defeated, took one step forward. And the sky screeched. Every radio, every regime comm link, every satellite dish still hanging by a thread suddenly screamed with static. Then silence. Then a voice not human, not digital, not from here, just one phrase. He sees you. And from the clouds, shrouded in black wings and red prophecy, he descended. The Mothman. Arms outstretched like a crucifix of warning. Wingspan wider than the courthouse ruin. Eyes like blood moons, locked on Superman. Clark turned. No fear, just irritation. Another nightmare, he muttered. The Mothman shrieked, a sound like twisted metal and prophecy tearing loose from fate itself, and dived. He hit Superman like a thunderclap, tackling him into the ground. Talons ripping at solar flesh, wings beating hurricane wind into the battlefield. Johnny watched, coughing blood, not believing but somehow not surprised. Because Lancaster always had another story waiting. But Mothman didn't last long. Superman exploded upward, heat vision ripping through the sky. One beam. One scream. One dead omen. The Mothman's body arced across the tree line like a broken prophecy, crashing in a burst of black feathers and silence. Clark hovered again, breathing hard, steam rising from his back. I'm done with this freak show. But the freak show was just beginning. The Jersey Devil landed next. Screeching, galloping on clawed limbs, fire in its breath. Behind it came the Snallygaster, teeth gnashing like saw blades, wings blotting what was left of the sun. From the woods, the Goatman emerged, dragging a rusted axe through the mist. From the river, the Chessie, the bay serpent of the deep, coiled and rose like the skeleton of a long-forgotten god. And from the edges of shadow, the Flatwoods monster, the Wendigo, the Nightwalkers, Melonheads, the Bunnymen, and something that may have once been called Indrid Cold. They came not as saviors, not as soldiers, but as consequence. Lancaster's oldest stories, its unspoken guardians, bound not by love for man but by tether to the land, had awakened. And Johnny, shaking, whispered with a cracked smile, "You pissed off the wrong folklore, Kal. They don't protect me. They protect the story." Superman Prime clenched his fists as the monsters encircled him. One God. Against every myth Lancaster ever whispered into the dark. It became a siege. Superman Prime hovering in the eye of a storm not made of wind, but of legend lashed out in defiance. He was fury given form. Solar wrath in a red cape. His heat vision swept across the tree-line, burning through the Snallygaster's wings, collapsing it in smoke and screams. He caught the goatman by the throat, crushed its windpipe, and hurled the corpse into the river. Stay down. He fired a sonic clap that flattened a dozen cryptids in one brutal wave. But the land didn't care. The story didn't end. Because they kept coming. From the mists on the hill, a wave of skinwalkers half-wolf, half-shadow raced forward on all fours, shrieking in ancestral tongues, surrounding him with claws dipped in Navajo vengeance. He fought them off, tearing through them, glowing fists snapping bone and shadow, but each time he turned, more rose. From beneath the ground, zombie claws burst through the soil, not undead in the Hollywood sense, but Lancaster's buried wrongs, risen in twisted, sunless hunger. Their eyes milky, their hands outstretched not for justice, for memory. Superman Prime began to breathe harder. His solar light flickered, not gone, but spread too thin. That's when the necromorphs arrived. Not folklore, but invasion horror, shapes warped by cosmic blight, crawling from cracks in time, drawn to the anomaly Superman had become. Twisted limbs, bone blades, jawless mouth screaming in anti-language. He screamed back and ripped three apart with his bare hands. But their bodies didn't bleed. They multiplied. From the banks of the river came the water demon, tall, skeletal, robes of algae trailing behind it like royal burial cloth. Its eyes were like wells with no bottom, and its voice whispered in drowned Latin as it stepped forward, flooding the battlefield with every step. Superman punched its head clean off, but the water kept coming. And then, a new sound. Heavy. Hollow. Metal on bone. From the far tree-line, like a funeral procession with purpose, stepped the Ironville, a rusted man-shape of Amish myth, face hidden behind an iron helmet, shoulders wide enough to blot moonlight. Its arms dragged chains that sang of betrayal. Behind it, riding a nightmare horse of fire and brimstone, the headless horseman galloped across burning fields, swinging a pumpkin forged from ghost light and vengeance. Boom! The horseman collided with Superman. Their crash leveled a grain silo. Superman ripped the rider off the horse, drove him into the earth, but the body kept fighting, headless, swinging. Then the Alba Witch swarmed the ape folk of Chickee's Rock, howling and hurling spectral apples that detonated on impact. Then came the pigmen, short and squat and vicious, crawling out of slaughterhouse ruins with cleavers and hooks. Waves now. Dozens. Then hundreds. A full-blown mythic revolt. Superman Prime was still standing. Still glowing. Still killing monsters with each strike. but each blow cost more. Each breath pulled harder. His aura was flickering like a radio lost between stations. And standing off to the side, leaning against a ruined post, one arm clutched to his ribs, Johnny Vanjik watched. Bloody. Broken. But smiling. Now you see it, don't you, Kal? You beat the heroes. You killed the monsters. But you forgot the one rule of Lancaster. Johnny stepped forward, barely standing, hatchet in one hand. The land doesn't forget. And it never fights alone. The land answered. For every drop of blood spilled. For every memory trampled. For every story Superman tried to bury beneath his heat vision and fists. The land finally screamed back. The monsters surged. And Clark, the last god standing, was overwhelmed. His punches grew weaker. His aura flickered like a dying candle. His roars no longer cleared the field. They just made the cryptids fight harder. The Wendigo leapt on his back, digging claws through the solar skin. Skinwalkers tore at his legs. The Flatwoods monster unleashed a mind-scramble screech that sent blood trickling from Clark's ears. He tore them off. He fought. But then a shadow passed overhead. Not a plane. Not a beast. A sky. A verdict. Clouds rolled in, thick and black and unnatural, pulling from the corners of the world like a curtain being drawn. No lightning. No thunder. Just darkness. No sun. No more light for him to drink. The land had made its choice. Lancaster would no longer feed the invader. Clark gasped. And for the first time since the sun birthed his power, Superman Prime felt hunger. His knees buckled. His glow vanished. And from the mob of monsters, the Mothman rose again, wings bent, body broken, but alive. He let out a call not of horror but of warning fulfilled. Then, with one titanic flap of his wings, he struck Superman clean across the jaw. Crack. The sound echoed like a gavel. Superman flew backward, no longer flying under his own strength, just launched like debris from his own downfall. He slammed into the earth, carving a trench across the riverbed. And when he stopped, he landed at Johnny's feet. Johnny stood over him, hatchet in one hand, face caked in mud and blood, ribs broken, vision doubled, but alive, and human. Superman now just Kall tried to rise. His strength was still immense, but not infinite. He was cut off. He was mortal. Johnny stared down at him. No rage in his face. Just grim purpose. You wanted to rule a world of men, Kal. He stepped forward and brought the hatchet down across Superman's forearm. Crack. A real crack now. Bone. Not aura. Clark screamed. Johnny slammed a boot into his chest and brought the butt of the magnum down on his face. Thud. Then learned to bleed like one. Clark spat blood. Turned his head. Tried to blast heat vision. Nothing. Just a low, sickly hum. A flicker of red. A cough. Johnny grabbed the front of his suit and hauled him up, face to face. You killed gods. You enslaved cities. But out here? You came for the wrong county. He punched him. Once. Then again. Then again. Flesh to flesh. Superman's jaw shattered. His nose broke. And Johnny whispered, for it against his enemies. Welcome to Lancaster. Then he drove Superman to the ground and beat him like a man beats a tyrant. Not with power. With purpose. The world was quiet now. Just wind through bone. The river whispering like it wanted to close the book. And Johnny blood-soaked, shaking, breathing like every inhale cost him a year of his life, stood over the broken god. Superman lay on his back, eyes swollen shut, mouth slack, spitting blood with every breath. Beaten. Mortal. Human. Johnny raised the .44 Magnum, the steel catching the last gray light beneath the cloud blanket. He thumbed the hammer back. No kings in Lancaster. His finger curled. And then a hand closed around his wrist. Cold. Gauntleted. Unmistakable. That's enough, Johnny. The voice came low, graveled, as if dragged out from behind 10,000 regrets. Johnny didn't need to turn to know who it was. Batman. Still standing. Still watching. Somehow, always knowing exactly when to show up. You saw what he did, Johnny growled, not lowering the weapon. What he became. He killed them. The monsters. The cryptids. The old guard. He broke the land and tried to bury its memory. And now I'm gonna bury him. Batman's grip tightened slightly, not aggressive, but unyielding. You already won. The land rejected him. The monsters answered. The myth bled true. His voice was tired. Not weak, just done with war. You pull that trigger, and you let his story end with martyrdom. You don't want that, Johnny. Lancaster doesn't want that. Johnny's hand shook. The weight of the gun now felt enormous, not because of steel, but because of legacy. Superman groaned beneath them. Not a threat. Just broken. A sunless god, beaten down by folklore and fire. Johnny looked down. The river behind him rippled, like it was waiting. He sighed. Let his arm fall. Let the hammer fall too, uncocked. The gun lowered. And for the first time in hours, he closed his eyes. Then let the world remember him like this, he said. Face down in the dirt he thought he owned. Batman released his wrist. Didn't say another word. Didn't need to. The fight was over. But the story? The story had just earned its ending. The moment the gun lowered, the land exhaled. The air, still thick with legend and smoke, seemed to settle not in peace, but in verdict. Like the battlefield itself acknowledged. The god has fallen. Johnny stepped back, swaying slightly. Batman caught his elbow just enough to steady him. That's when the sound of engines echoed in the distance, low, urgent, and growing. Tires over dirt. Armor shifting. Old world radios crackling. Out from the tree lean, headlights cut through the mist. They came in convoys, dozens of them. Armored trucks. Humvees repurposed from regime wreckage. Battle-worn, marked not with flags, but with symbols of hope sewn by hand. From atop one of the transports stood a woman in reinforced leather, scar across her cheek, rifle slung, eyes hard. Kara Zor-El. Not regime. Not anymore. The resistance had arrived. Men and women dismounted with discipline. Not soldiers by birth but fighters by choice. They approached slowly, not rushing the moment. Not because they feared Kall, but because they wanted to see it for themselves. Superman. Lying in the dirt. Barely breathing. His suit torn. His emblem cracked and smeared with mud. No aura. No heat. Just a man. The crowd parted as two resistance medics and a containment officer approached. No hesitation. No ceremony. They set down the restraint rig forged from nth metal, red sun alloy, and the bones of fallen satellites. Superman stirred slightly. One eye opened. He saw the cuffs. The chains. The rebellion standing over him. He said nothing. He had no more speeches left. The resistance bound him. Chain by chain. Cuff by cuff. Symbol by symbol. As they locked the last shackle over his shoulders, Kara knelt down beside her cousin, watching his face. It didn't have to end this way, Kal. Superman tried to speak. Coughed. Then closed his eyes. The medics dragged him upright, limp between two soldiers. He didn't resist. He was done. The resistance turned toward Johnny and Batman. Some saluted. Some just nodded. But every eye carried the same truth. You didn't just survive. You made the story matter again. And as Superman was loaded into the armored transport, the sky remained clouded. Still no sun. Because the world was remembering. And it wasn't done yet. Johnny winced as a medic pressed gauze to his ribs, what was left of them. He sat on the tailgate of a scorched resistance truck, jacket off, skin blackened in patches, breathing in low, deliberate rhythm like someone used to pain being part of the plan. Batman stood nearby, arms crossed, not in threat. In recognition. The kind of distance kept only between equals who don't know what the word friend means anymore. You know, I was never sure if you were real myself, Batman said, voice low behind the cowl. Even in my work your name is just smoke. Ghost sightings. Interference reports. Scorched earth saves with no signature left behind. He paused. Watched as a medic wrapped a pressure band around Johnny's side. One of the younger resistance fighters glanced at Batman, wide-eyed, as if surprised the Bat was even speaking to someone like this. Batman didn't blink. You're damn near impossible to track down. Johnny cracked a grin, though his face flinched with the pain it cost him. Good. That's how Lancaster taught me to be. He pulled a flask from inside what remained of his coat and took a slow sip, probably something strong enough to sterilize wounds and regret. Then he looked up at Bruce, tired silver blue eyes studying the man behind the mask. You don't track legends, Bats. You leave offerings and hope they don't track you. Batman gave the ghost of a nod, just enough to mean respect, not worship. The world owes you. But it also needs you. Johnny leaned back, arm across his gut, grimacing as the medic stitched up the worst of it. It doesn't need me, Bruce. He glanced toward the blacked-out sky, where the cryptids were already fading, not retreating, just returning to their slumber, now that the balance had been reset. It just needs to remember. A beat passed. Then another. Batman looked away. You'll vanish again, won't you? Johnny didn't answer. He didn't have to. He just smirked. And somewhere beneath the wreckage, the bell rang once. Soft. Clear. Final. And then he was gone. No flash of light. No vortex. No theatrical fade. Just absence. 1 second Johnny Vanjik was there, bleeding, broken, grinning like he'd just outplayed fate itself. The next, only the echo of his voice remained. Don't worry. If the nightmares ever show up again, I'll let them know why they should be afraid of the dark. The medics looked around, confused. The resistance soldiers froze. Batman didn't move. He just stood there, cape rustling in the haunted wind, eyes fixed on the empty spot where a man became myth again. No trace. No blood. Not even a boot print. Just the silence of something finished, for now. The sky above Lancaster held its breath. The monsters had retreated. The regime was broken. The story had been defended. But everyone who saw him that day, soldier, monster, or legend alike, would remember. Because Johnny Vanjik didn't disappear. He withdrew. Like a loaded gun in the night, waiting to be fired again. And where he'd been sitting just moments before the story let him slip away again, something remained. A small, worn rectangle of time. No blast. No light. Just a comic book, folded once at the spine, placed deliberately on the blood-streaked tailgate. The cover weathered, yellowed at the corners but unmistakable. Detective Comics number 27. May, 1939. The first appearance of Batman. A relic from the main timeline. From a universe still stitched together by simpler myths. From a world where the bat was just beginning to rise. Batman stepped forward, eyes narrowing behind the cowl. He reached out, not hesitating, not trembling, just curious. He picked it up, held it like a memory he never gave himself permission to have. No note, no signature. Just that old, iconic image of a caped figure swinging over Gotham with a criminal in one hand and destiny in the other. Bruce stared at it for a long time. And finally, under his breath, TCH. Smart ass. But he smiled. Just barely. Then he tucked the book inside his utility belt, turned toward the soldiers loading Superman into reinforced transport, and walked into the mist, leaving behind only the Bell's memory. A wounded land beginning to heal. And a name the world wouldn't dare forget again. Johnny Vanjik. The man who made the dark afraid. Back at the Batcave deep beneath stone and silence, the lights hummed low, casting long shadows across a lifetime of secrets. Trophies lined the walls. Batarangs. Costumes. Artifacts from villains, victories, and wars most of the world never knew had happened. But this time Bruce didn't place the item behind glass. He didn't log it into the computer. Didn't mark it under multiversal incident. He just walked to a quiet corner of the cave between the case that once held Jason's suit and the cracked monitor still looping old League files, and set the comic down. Detective Comics number 27. Original. Untouched. But now bearing the faintest burn along its edge, a mark that hadn't been there before. A hint of fire, or maybe, story. He stood over it, silent. This comic, the first glimpse of him now, stood as the only tangible evidence of what had happened in Lancaster. Of a war between gods and monsters. Of a man who bled myth into reality. Bruce placed a single steel frame around the book. Not polished. Not engraved. Just clean. Simple. And above it, etched into the rock with his own gauntlet blade, he carved the only words that felt appropriate. For the one who made legends bleed. V. He didn't mention the multiverse. Didn't explain it to anyone. Didn't file a report. Because this wasn't for the League. This was for him. For the one moment he wasn't the smartest man in the room. For the one man he couldn't trace. The ghost who reminded him. Even the dark night has things left to learn. And behind the silent glass, lit by the soft blue glow of ancient computers, the comic sat still. A joke. A trophy. A truth. The first Batman. And the only proof that a man named Johnny Vanjik ever walked through his world.
reaction notification message. This station has interrupted its regular program at the request of the White House to participate in the emergency alert system. During this emergency, most stations will remain on the air, providing news and information to the public